Hi everyone and welcome to our latest Qonic release video. I'm Barbara and Jacob is here to walk you through everything live in Qonic today. It's been a busy few weeks. In Berlin we were honored with the openBIM award for the Qonic Intelligence feature, and we're keeping that momentum going with a new release focused on making everyday BIM simpler and faster. If rigid tools and manual steps slow you down, this one's for you. First up, Qonic now supports a bi-directional link with Revit. That means changes you make in Qonic can be sent straight back to the original Revit file.
Yes, so let me demonstrate this in the product. So to have this bidirectional link between Qonic and Revit, you would need the Qonic plugin for Revit, which can be found on our downloads page on the website. Once you've installed the plugin, you can simply open a model in Revit, send that to Qonic and send it straight back to Revit after making some changes in Qonic. So let me show that. I will export this model to Qonic. For this I can choose any project I have access to. In this case I've created this empty project, my Revit project, which I will just select, and here you'll see that the Revit model will be sent from Revit to this project in Qonic. After exporting, I can simply open this project in Qonic and I'll be able to make changes where necessary. Alright, so let's check it out here. So my Revit project in Qonic, I can see the model has come through. It's uploaded a few seconds ago and it's now doing some final modifications or some final processing to be able to open the file. Okay, there it is. Now let me open this model in Qonic and I'll make some minor modifications to this model as a demonstration of how this syncing works. Alright, so let me make a few changes. For example, maybe I will resize this window here. I'm using the stretch feature, which I will talk about a bit later as well. Maybe let's also move this window. Maybe I can do some direct modeling on some of the geometry. So let's take a look here. I will give the top of this wall a bit of a rotation. And maybe I'll also just align this face with this one here. So just some modeling tools to make some changes. Let's also make a data modification. So for example, I have this fireplace here. I can see all of its properties from Revit. I can also use Qonic to enrich this with more information. For example, maybe I want to add some IFC properties, maybe a description, for instance. Let's call this a hanging fireplace. Okay, so I've made multiple modifications. Before I can send this back to Revit, I need to publish my changes. So for those of you who know Qonic already a bit, Qonic works with a version history system where all the changes can be saved and reverted where needed. So I'll call this my changes, just generic title. And as soon as I've published this, I will be able to import these changes back to Revit using this plugin. So I'll import these changes. And here I can see seeing the arrow, it's going from Qonic to Revit and it's actually picking up the project as well as the version of this model that I applied my changes to. So I just click import and in a few seconds those changes that I've made will be synced back to the original Revit file. So let's take a look at the 3D model here. I can see indeed this window has been resized. This one has been moved. The geometry of this wall has changed as well. And if I take a look at the fireplace, it should now contain this extra description here, hanging fireplace. So that makes it quite easy to sync changes from Revit to Qonic and back. So in theory, you could work in parallel in both software to use the tool that works best for the task you need to do.
All right. Next, one of my favorites, stretching doors and windows, because adjusting a window and doors has always been a hard job. And now you can simply grab a side face of the frame in Qonic and you can drag it. And the surrounding context stretches automatically with it.
Yes, so we've introduced this stretch tool. For now, it's limited to windows and doors, allowing you to take the side face of a window, like this for instance, and start stretching it to make it wider or narrower or higher or less high. Now you see here actually in this case that there are details that are auto-detected with this window. So you can see here this balcony highlighted in blue, this French balcony. This French balcony is actually not part of the window. It's a separate object, but the stretch tool automatically recognizes this as part of the context of the window. And this means that if I resize this window here, the railing or a balcony will also be stretched with it. Now you'll also see when I, for example, resize this window here. Let's resize it a bit in this direction, make it about 1 meter wider. It's not actually just a simple stretch where all of the different geometry pieces of the window are stretched along one axis. There are actually temporary constraints defined to make sure that the frame thickness remains unchanged, and for example, the divider or the mullion stays in the middle of the window in this case. These constraints are generated on the fly because, again, this model in this case came in via IFC, which means the original parameters or the original constraints from the original authoring tool are lost in translation. So we basically regenerate these constraints on the fly to be able to model freely without any restrictions. You can also use this, for example, to change the vision of this window. Maybe I want to move the divider over like this. So it should feel really easy and intuitive to, in this case, resize windows and doors.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing new feature. It's quick, it's visual, and you don't have extra steps anymore. And speaking of making things easier to align, grids are key. But often the grids disappear once a model is imported, which means you can't rely on them in 3D or use them for snapping. So from now on, you can visualize grids in your model and use them directly as a reference for modeling operations.
Yeah, so if your model contains grids, you can visualize them using this setting here. So in this case, I can see one grid for each building. And what's cool about this feature is that these grids will be projected on the geometry that you're working with depending on the context. So for example, let's say I want to model something here on the roof. I'll just start a tool. You'll see the grid automatically projected on this surface, allowing me to quickly snap to, for example, the grid intersection here to start modeling from there. This also means, for example, if I want to move this wall, also the grid will appear on this face and I'm able to snap on it. So I don't always need to go in top-down view to see the grid. The grid will always be visible where I need it when I'm doing modeling operations.
And finally, spaces. They're often introduced during the design stage, but then forgotten, and even though they are very useful for quantifying. In Qonic, you can now visualize spaces and use them directly for calculations or area checks.
Yeah, so spaces are also behind the same setting here. Next to grids, you can also now visualize spaces, which will actually show them here colored and with this colored hatch here. And you can use them indeed for quantification. You can make some edits to these spaces. Now, quick disclaimer, at this point, it's not yet possible to create spaces within Qonic. Same goes for grids. For now, it's basically importing, visualizing, and doing things with them. So here I can see each individual space automatically assigned a new color. I can select the spaces, I can see the properties, I can quantify them. For example, maybe I want to know what is the volume of this space. I can use the measure tool to measure the net volume, for instance, which in this case is 88 cubic meters for this particular space. And I can even start to modify them. For example, Maybe I want to split this single space here into a kitchen and a living room. I can use the slice tool for that. To create two individual space objects. Now, before we wrap up this session, there's a few more things I want to show. These are improvements rather than new features, but I think it's worth showing you as well. So one of the improvements that we've made is the issues panel, which has been redesigned. So when opening the issues panel, we now get a clearer view of all the different issues, as well as an actual 3D location pin for each issue. So for example, I can see here there's an issue to create foundation piles in this model here. I can click it and it will open that particular issue in the issues panel. And you'll also see when I create new issues, I now have a few more options in terms of detailing this issue. For example, a new status option is available, and so on. And now a final improvement we've made is not necessarily to the product itself, but to the documentation. We have now added a revamped API documentation page. So if you go to our help center, help.qonic.com, you will find this link here to our API documentation, which includes code snippets and examples to help you on your way when trying to create integrations with Qonic.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Well, that's it for this release. With Qonic, we're cutting down on rework, on manual steps, and making the invisible data visible. And you can already explore all these new features today at app.qonic.com. And as always, your feedback makes a real difference, so keep sharing how Qonic fits into your workflow. If you'd like to see Qonic live in action, join our webinar on Wednesday, 22nd of October, where Aaron Perry will show you how you open complex models in seconds, how you fix data right in your browser, and how you collaborate with unlimited users. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.